week's reflection follows on from last week. And last week we were talking about how Jesus took his disciples aside and he said, who do you say that I am? And Peter said, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, that's great, Peter. It's God himself who's shown you that. You haven't worked that out for yourself. And so Peter's just had a great moment of spiritual insight. Didn't just see Jesus as the Messiah, but also recognised that he was God. So at that point, Jesus says to them, well, this is what's going to happen. The Son of God, Son of Man must go to Jerusalem. He will be killed and he will suffer and be killed. And Peter's immediate reaction is, no way, we're not going to let that happen to you. And stop and think for a moment what's going on here. Peter's just had this great flash of spiritual insight. He's seen that Jesus is God. And so Jesus, God, is now telling them what's going to happen. And Peter immediately takes Jesus, God, aside and says, no way, we're not going to let that happen. He's gone from recognising God to telling God what to do. No wonder Jesus responded to him in very strong terms and said, get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. That must really have stung Peter, especially being referred to as Satan. But it's an example how easily we can go from a great spiritual high to being completely self-absorbed. Peter's motive for not letting Jesus die was sure he loved Jesus, didn't want that to happen to him. But also, he didn't want to lose Jesus, he loved him. And so there was a selfish motive in there too. Now Jesus called Peter a stumbling block. The word used is scandalon, and it actually means a rock on which you trip over. And it's interesting because Jesus has just called Peter, or the confession that he is the Messiah, the Son of God, as the rock on which the church will be built. Now he's calling Peter the rock on which he can trip up. The reason being that to avoid the cross would be a huge temptation for Jesus. It would have been something that was always on his mind. I mean, it started back in the desert where Satan came and tempted him. And the third temptation was to say to Jesus, look, you've come to take the kingdoms of the world. They're all yours. I'll just hand them to you. There's only one thing. I just want you to kneel and worship me. In other words, don't go the hard way. Don't go the way of the cross. I'll hand it to you if you worship me. Of course, Jesus knew that that was just not on. And now again, Jesus is being offered a way to avoid the cross. Peter's saying, no, won't let that happen to you. But this time, this temptation's coming through a very close friend, someone that Jesus loved. And this is a very powerful way in which temptation comes to us. And this is an example. Say, one night you really feel, I should go and see Mrs. McGillicuddy. Something's nudging you to go and see her. And you say that to your spouse, and your spouse says, oh no, I was really looking forward to having a night in together. We don't get that very often. Why is it that you always consider other people's needs before mine? I'm your wife or husband, whichever it is. Surely I get top priority. Before long, you'll be saying, yeah, you're right. We need to take this time together. And so you stay home while poor Mrs. McGillicuddy is struggling with suicidal thoughts and no one there to help her. Our loved ones can be a very strong source of temptation to digress us from the path that God has for us. When Jesus was telling his friends what was going to happen to him, he didn't say, look, I really get this feeling that if I keep going the way I'm going, that I'm going to end up being put to death. He didn't say that. He said, I must go to Jerusalem. I must be killed. Despite all the temptation to avoid the cross, Jesus knows it is the only way. And he keeps temptation at bay by focusing on what God wants, not on what he feels like. And so he then begins to explain to his followers what it means to be a follower. And the first statement is, you must deny yourself. And then he says, deny yourself and take up the cross, or the way of the cross. And that's what it means for us to be followers of Jesus. We have to deny self. Now that doesn't mean that we just give up chocolate. unless you're giving it up because someone else really, really wants it and you're going to sacrifice your chocolate for them. It doesn't mean going and living in a cave and surviving on lettuce leaves so that you can pray for 18 or 20 hours a day. What it does mean is our living in a way that puts the needs of other people ahead of ourselves. It may mean sometimes we do have to be quite sacrificial, but we want to live in a way that is best for God's kingdom, not ourselves. The way of the cross is not just hard times. I mean, a lot of people will say, oh, that grumpy old Aunt Agatha, she's the cross I have to bear. Or my arthritis is the cross I have to bear. The way of the cross is not that. The way of the cross is the willingness to give our lives, if that's what required of us. Live in the way Jesus wants, even to the point of giving our life. Now, to deny self is absolutely counterculture in this world. Things like, oh, you deserve it. Do what feels right for you. I have my rights. No one tells me what to do. They say this youngest generation now is probably the most narcissistic of all generations. Now, we certainly don't want people to be bullied or put down, but we do want people who choose to put others ahead of themselves. Jesus wasn't forced to go to Jerusalem. He chose to go. He chose to go knowing what lay ahead of him. He knew that there was only one way to deal with the sinfulness of human nature, and that was that he had to take it on himself and pay the price himself. He gave everything for us. How much are we willing to give for him? If we focus totally on the life now, we're in danger of not having life beyond this one. God's rules are for a good life now and for joy in eternity.
When it's all been said